Good evening, and welcome to a journey you might wish you'd skipped. Tonight, we are venturing into a world that seems ordinary at first glance. Hotels, motels, and inns where millions of travelers pass through every year, oblivious to the darkness that lingers just behind the locked doors and flickering lights. This isn't a list of myths or tales spun from imagination. These are stories drawn from the experiences of people who, like you, were seeking nothing more than a place to sleep, only to discover that safety is often an illusion. So settle in, make yourself comfortable, and let the shadows of these 15 true disturbing hotel horror stories take control. Our first tale begins on a humid summer evening in Atlanta, Georgia. A father and son were driving late at night, intent on visiting relatives. Their journey was supposed to be straightforward. Leave after the father's shift, arrive before midnight, and spend a few hours catching up before heading home. But the universe had a different plan. Traffic snarled around them, pushing their estimated arrival time past 3 in the morning. Exhaustion and frustration mounted, and the father made a pragmatic decision. They would find a hotel for the night, let his parents sleep undisturbed, and continue in the morning. Every good hotel, however, was already booked. A regional baseball tournament and the Atlanta furniture market had stripped the city of available rooms. Desperate, they pulled into a weathered Motel 6 on the outskirts. Bars lined the lobby windows, and the glass was cracked or shattered in several places. The exterior alone was enough to give pause. But the alternatives were worse. A cramped truck cabin, or hours more on the road. Inside, the lobby appeared deceptively tidy. The clerk greeted them, if not with warmth, then at least without hesitation, handing over the key without a word of caution. What awaited them behind their assigned door was beyond imagination. Sliding the key into the lock, the son was met with resistance. The metal swing bar was engaged from the inside, a warning that went unheeded until he peered through the gap. 3 pit bulls lunged forward, teeth bared, claws scraping against linoleum. And behind them sat a man calmly cleaning, a shotgun on the bedspread, his eyes locking onto the intruder. Another man emerged, wide-shouldered and muscle-bound, holding a semi-automatic pistol. The confrontation was silent, terrifying in its simplicity. Words stumbled from the son's mouth, an attempt to clarify a misunderstanding. The reply was nonchalant, almost bored. "It isn't your room." Retreating swiftly, the father demanded a refund at the desk. The clerk sighed, handing the money back without argument. Even years later, that night haunted the son. Every hotel he enters prompts a pause, a check of locks, a lingering doubt that safety is never guaranteed. The second story takes us to Hungary in the summer of 1986. 2 young women, freed from university and full of wanderlust, had planned a 3-week journey across Eastern Europe. Their destination, Budapest. They had saved for years, dreaming of cafes, cobblestone streets, and golden sunsets along the Danube. Their anticipation was palpable. But the moment they stepped into their hotel, something felt wrong. The lobby was dark, saturated with cigarette smoke. The clerk's gaze swept over them, invasive, lingering. The room itself was peeling, sagging, and poorly secured. Despite the apparent discomfort, the women decided to settle in, brushing off unease with laughter and a shrug of youthful bravado. As night fell, the city around them sparkled with life. They wandered streets lined with glowing lanterns, sampling wine and goulash in small, bustling cafes. The enchantment of Budapest temporarily dulled the shadow that loomed over their accommodation. But shadows have a way of catching up. On their way back, a motorbike parked near the cafe caught the attention of one of the women. Two men on the bike, clad in black leather and helmets, seemed to follow them silently, blending with the night while remaining conspicuous enough to unsettle the observer. She voiced her suspicion, dismissed lightly by her friend. But when they turned the corner toward their hotel, the men drove off, leaving a lingering dread that would define the next several hours. That night, their instinct for self-preservation kicked in. Furniture was dragged in front of doors. Windows were secured. Every precaution a measure against a threat both seen and unseen. Sleep was fitful. Each creak of the floor, each gust of wind amplifying anxiety. And then came the knock. A careful, insistent rapping, accompanied by a voice attempting to imitate a female tone. Housekeeping, it claimed, but the clock read 2:30 a.m. The terror that followed defied any attempt at rationalization. Two men, the same from earlier, burst into the room, dragging one of the women into the hallway. Screams echoed through empty corridors as she fought, disoriented and beaten. The witness ran barefoot after them, encountering indifferent guests, an inattentive staff, and finally, salvation in the form of police sirens. The investigation revealed a ring of traffickers targeting foreign women, with victims rarely seen again. This story, like the first, emphasizes a recurring theme. Hotels, symbols of comfort and transience, can transform into arenas of unimaginable danger. The fear lingers because it is plausible. It could happen to anyone. Our third tale is more contemporary yet no less disturbing. A traveler seeking thrill and anecdotal fame booked a notoriously low-rated hotel, motivated by curiosity and viral TikTok trends. The property was a dilapidated nightmare, a flickering neon sign, a parking lot littered with abandoned vehicles, and a lobby that smelled of mildew and despair. The clerk's parting words, "Don't leave anything valuable," carried an ominous weight, undercutting any sense of safety. Once inside the room, the traveler was confronted with evidence of decay and neglect. Cigarette burns, stained curtains, and the unmistakable presence of vermin. Amid the filth, a discarded needle hinted at dangers beyond the ordinary. Outside, a gunshot resonated, followed by the sight of a dead man in the parking lot, cementing the horror of the location. This narrative, while infused with dark humor, underscores the latent terror embedded in what many consider mundane travel choices. Even routine trips can unravel into chaos. A planned visit to Sonoma County for a wedding took a harrowing turn when the intended accommodations were fully booked. Compelled to settle for a lower-tier motel, the travelers faced the unpredictable. A van pulling up in the dead of night. A group of men attempting entry into a neighboring room, and the realization that law enforcement was nearby yet unaware until the last moment. The threat, immediate and tangible, shattered any illusion of security. Moments like these reveal the precarious balance between normalcy and danger in spaces that promise comfort but can deliver terror. The pattern is unmistakable. Each story relies on several narrative pillars. First, the setting, a place assumed safe. Second, the subtle warning signs, small irregularities, instinctual unease. Third, the escalation, an encounter that defies expectation and threatens life. And finally, the lingering effect, the psychological residue that remains long after the incident ends. These pillars are threaded seamlessly through each account, creating a continuous tension that keeps listeners engaged. The fourth story delves into the darker aspects of human nature. A young family on a cross-country journey believed they had prepared for the worst. Yet, even careful planning cannot account for malevolence that emerges from the shadows. Their hotel room, adjacent to the entrance and visible from outside, seemed secure at first glance. But in the early hours, a van parked outside became the focal point of creeping dread. Men emerged, banging on neighboring rooms, dragging a woman toward the vehicle. The presence of children heightened the stakes, emphasizing vulnerability in ostensibly benign environments. Intervention, when it arrived, was serendipitous, illustrating both the randomness of danger and the narrow margin between safety and catastrophe. What unites these narratives is a focus on relatable terror. None require belief in supernatural forces. Each exploits fear grounded in reality. Strangers with malicious intent, neglected infrastructure, and the thin veneer separating comfort from peril. Listeners recognize these scenarios as plausible, which intensifies their emotional response. By anchoring horror in the familiar, motels, travel, late nights, the stories cultivate suspense that is both immediate and lingering. Across these accounts, the narrator employs a first-person perspective to immerse the audience fully. Sensory details are meticulously rendered. The squeak of a hinge, the flicker of a failing light bulb, the metallic clatter of weapons. Dialogue is sparse but effective, capturing moments of tension and human reaction without overwhelming the listener with exposition. Pacing is deliberate, allowing dread to accumulate gradually before delivering moments of intense revelation. This methodology ensures engagement as the audience becomes complicit in the unfolding fear. Even humor finds its place in these narratives, albeit sparingly. In the contemporary hotel story, absurd observations about bed bugs, needle hazards, and other grotesque elements provide a temporary respite, a contrast that paradoxically amplifies the underlying terror. Such contrast framing is a hallmark of effective storytelling. It punctuates tension with relief, only to return the audience to suspense with greater impact. The evolution of these tales demonstrates a clear understanding of audience psychology. Listeners are drawn to stories that could plausibly happen to them. Yet they appreciate narrative craftsmanship that guides them through fear safely. Each story adheres to a structural rhythm: introduction of normalcy, emergence of subtle warnings, escalation to direct threat, climax, and reflective denouement. The final reflection, whether fear, relief, or lingering unease, serves to cement the emotional resonance. By now, it should be apparent that hotels, the archetypal spaces of transient safety, are ideal vessels for terror. They contain the duality of familiarity and isolation, providing both comfort and vulnerability. In the hands of an expert narrator, this duality transforms ordinary experiences. Checking in, entering a room, locking a door, into moments charged with suspense. The tension derives not from spectacle but from recognition. Listeners understand instinctively the dangers posed, which creates a profound emotional connection to the narrative. The fifth story takes us to a small family-run inn in rural Kentucky, a place that looked charming in the daylight but revealed a different character under the veil of night. A couple, tired from a long drive, arrived late in the evening. The inn's exterior was inviting, with flower boxes lining the windows and a faintly glowing lantern by the entrance. Inside, the smell of aged wood and homemade bread filled the air. The clerk greeted them with a warm smile and a recommendation for the local diner. Everything seemed perfect. Yet, the moment they entered their room, something felt off. The windows, though elegantly framed, did not latch properly. A faint scraping sound echoed from the air vents, faint but rhythmic. The couple attributed it to the old building, a relic of an era when craftsmanship meant creaking floors and drafty windows. As the night progressed, the couple's unease grew. A series of noises, thuds, muffled laughter, and whispers seemed to come from the adjacent rooms. They rationalized, imagining other guests settling in, children playing, or perhaps the wind shifting through the old timbers. But rationalization can only last so long. Around 2 a.m., the whispers became more distinct, coherent in a language neither understood. The sound of keys jangling, furniture scraping, and doors opening and closing echoed through the corridor. The couple's instinct for survival sharpened. They locked the door, moved the bed against it, and attempted to sleep, though every creak of the floorboards sent a jolt through their bodies. The climax of this experience arrived when the husband, awakened by the scraping noise near the wardrobe, shone his flashlight toward the source. A shadow moved too quickly, too deliberately, for a human form to be alone. And then, a figure emerged, an elderly man wearing a caretaker's uniform, wielding a large wrench. His eyes were cold, assessing, and the couple realized that no one had warned them about the inn's reputation. Locals had spoken of strange disappearances, odd noises at night, and previous guests who left without explanation. The couple froze, exchanging glances that communicated unspoken panic. They moved slowly toward the window, preparing to escape into the darkness, their hearts pounding with each step. Finally, when the man's attention diverted to a creaking floorboard behind them, they bolted, sliding through the lobby unnoticed, and never returned. The sixth story originates from a coastal town in Maine, where a group of college friends rented rooms at a seaside hotel famous for its picturesque views of the Atlantic Ocean. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and crimson, giving the illusion of serenity. But by the time they settled into their rooms, an oppressive stillness had settled over the property. One of the friends, curious by nature, noticed the emergency exit door slightly ajar, swaying gently in the ocean breeze. She decided to investigate, thinking it a trivial matter. What she found was a narrow service hallway leading to an empty maintenance room, dimly lit and filled with cobwebs and dust. But as she turned to leave, the sound of footsteps echoed behind her. She turned, expecting one of her friends playing a prank, only to find the hallway empty. Yet the echo persisted, following her every move. Back in their rooms, the friends tried to dismiss the incidents as coincidences, the product of their collective imagination. But unease became reality when later that night, one of them noticed a pair of eyes peering through the peephole. A subtle, deliberate pause preceded a soft tap on the door. The friends huddled together, too afraid to confront what they might find. The tapping continued sporadically, sometimes in rhythm with their breaths, sometimes lagging behind, as though the observer anticipated their reactions. It became clear that someone or something had been watching them since their arrival. Only when they discovered a hidden camera lens, cleverly concealed in the door's peephole mechanism, did the terror crystallize into tangible danger. They alerted hotel management, and the property was closed indefinitely, leaving the friends shaken and permanently wary of even the most idyllic coastal retreats. Our seventh tale involves a solo traveler visiting Las Vegas. Intent on experiencing the excitement and glamour of the city, she booked a budget hotel known for its proximity to the Strip. The exterior shimmered with neon lights, promising glitz and allure. Yet inside, the lobby smelled faintly of smoke and stale carpet cleaner. Her room was on the 12th floor, and as she entered, the door made an odd, creaking sound, far louder than the mechanism should have allowed. The bed appeared normal, but a faint odor, reminiscent of damp clothing and mildew, clung to the sheets. Shrugging off her discomfort, she began unpacking, only to notice that the phone in the room dialed randomly. A series of clicks and murmured voices emerged from the receiver, and despite her attempts to disconnect it, the line remained active. The tension escalated around midnight. She heard movement in the adjacent room, followed by muffled voices speaking in rapid succession, punctuated by occasional loud bangs. Attempting to remain calm, she texted the front desk, only to receive no response. Peering through the window, she noticed a man on the neighboring balcony, staring directly at her, motionless and silent. Her phone battery was critically low, leaving her isolated and unable to call for help. She decided to leave, moving quickly through the dimly lit corridors. But the sound of footsteps mirrored her own. Only after exiting the building and reaching the crowded Las Vegas streets did she feel a semblance of safety, her adrenaline gradually subsiding. She would later learn from other guests that the hotel had a history of stalking incidents and unreported harassment, confirming her fears. The eighth story shifts to a mountainous region in Colorado. A family had rented a small lodge for a weekend getaway, anticipating crisp air, scenic hikes, and cozy nights by the fireplace. Upon arrival, everything appeared charming and inviting. Yet the cabin's interior told a different story. Locks on the doors were rusted, windows rattled even without wind, and a faint, unpleasant odor lingered in the corners. The parents set up their young child's sleeping area, unaware that someone had tampered with the room before their arrival. During the night, the mother awoke to faint footsteps and whispering voices near the door. Initially dismissing it as imagination, she froze when the doorknob began turning on its own. The situation escalated when a shadowy figure slipped through the slightly ajar window, entering the room silently. The mother's scream woke the father, who managed to restrain the intruder while simultaneously securing the child. Police arrived within minutes, but the investigation revealed that the lodge had been previously used as a hideout for a local gang. Items left behind in the child's sleeping area suggested that previous visitors had been similarly endangered, their reports buried or ignored. The family left immediately, leaving their reservations for the remainder of the weekend behind. The mother recounts that even years later, she cannot approach cabins or lodges without checking the locks multiple times, a habit formed from that single terrifying night. The ninth story is set in a Midwestern city, where a young couple had booked a suite in a hotel for their anniversary. The place had received positive online reviews, though few mentioned the faint odor of mildew lingering in hallways, or the flickering hallway lights. Upon entering their room, the couple noticed subtle details that seemed off. The minibar was empty, towels appeared threadbare, and a faint scratch mark on the doorframe suggested prior intrusion. At first, they brushed it off as minor maintenance issues. But unease grew as the evening progressed. Around 1 a.m., they heard a quiet knock, followed by a hushed voice requesting entry. The couple ignored it initially, assuming it was housekeeping. But when the knocking persisted, coupled with a whispering that mimicked their names, panic set in. They attempted to call the front desk, only to find the phone line disconnected. Retreating to the far corner of the room, they armed themselves with heavy objects, prepared for confrontation. Moments later, a shadow appeared at the door, probing the chain lock. The couple held their breath as the figure retreated, only to repeat the attempt minutes later. This went on intermittently throughout the night, creating a psychological torment that extended far beyond the physical threat. By morning, they checked out immediately, their anniversary ruined, and a lingering distrust of hotels had been cemented. The 10th story takes place in an abandoned resort in the outskirts of New Orleans. A group of thrill-seekers, eager for adventure, had heard rumors of the resort being haunted after a fire decades earlier. Arriving at dusk, the group was greeted by a sprawling structure. Blackened by soot and decay, windows shattered, and doors hanging off their hinges. The air carried a faint scent of smoke and charred wood. Despite warnings from locals, they entered, armed with flashlights and cameras, determined to capture evidence of the supernatural. Inside, the resort was a labyrinth of broken furniture, peeling wallpaper, and remnants of a life abruptly interrupted. As they explored the hallways, whispers seemed to echo from empty rooms. Each turn revealed graffiti-covered walls and personal items left behind, as if the former residents had vanished overnight. One of the group, more sensitive to the atmosphere, began to feel a cold pressure on her shoulders, as though unseen hands were guiding her forward. She tried to call out, but her voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence, leaving only the echo of her own heartbeat. Suddenly, a door slammed shut behind them, trapping the group in a dim corridor. Panicked, they tried to open it, but the handle wouldn't budge. Meanwhile, shadows flickered across the walls, moving independently of their flashlights. The air grew thick, oppressive, as if the building itself had taken notice of their presence. One member of the group saw a figure at the far end of the hallway. A man, thin, pale, with empty eyes, standing perfectly still. When he moved, it was a gliding motion, silent, deliberate. The group froze, and the temperature dropped sharply. Their phones began to die inexplicably, and the room lights flickered, as if the building were rejecting their intrusion. It took nearly an hour for them to escape, finding a broken window that led to the outside. Once free, they realized they had left behind several items, including cameras with footage corrupted beyond recovery. Weeks later, online forums discussed the phenomenon, with other visitors reporting similar encounters. Sudden cold spots, inexplicable shadows, and a persistent feeling of being watched. The resort remained abandoned, yet its legend grew with each new tale, a testament to the enduring terror of a place that should have been safe. The 11th story centers around a business traveler staying in a metropolitan hotel in Chicago. The man arrived late at night, weary from flights and meetings. The lobby was sleek, modern, and quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos outside on the city streets. The clerk, polite but hurried, handed him the key with a generic smile. Everything appeared normal until he reached his room. The hallway lights flickered intermittently, casting shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally along the walls. The door, though unlocked, resisted at first, and a faint scratching noise came from within. Once inside, the man noticed small anomalies. The bed was uneven, the curtains stained with a reddish-brown residue, and a faint odor lingered that was neither perfume nor cleaning solution. He attributed it to a rushed room turnover, but unease set in. Around midnight, a phone call came through, displaying the number as internal. He answered, only to hear breathing on the other end, slow, deliberate, and unnervingly close. Panicked, he hung up, only for the call to resume moments later. Repeated attempts to reach the front desk yielded no response. Finally, a knock on the door startled him, a voice whispering his name. He did not open. Hours later, he learned from other guests that the hotel had a history of intrusions, sometimes violent, sometimes merely psychological, leaving long-term trauma for those who experienced them. The 12th story transports us to a small coastal inn in Maine. A couple, celebrating their anniversary, checked into a seaside room with windows overlooking the crashing waves. At first, the setting was idyllic. The rhythmic sound of the ocean, the scent of salt in the air, and the golden hue of the setting sun. But as darkness fell, an oppressive weight settled over the room. Footsteps echoed in empty corridors, and doors creaked as though moved by invisible hands. A subtle tapping began on the window, growing louder with each minute. Attempts to call the front desk failed. The lines were dead. Determined to investigate, the couple discovered a service corridor leading to a maintenance room. Dusty and dimly lit, it contained various supplies, but also an unexpected visitor. A man in a dark jacket, face obscured, standing silently at the far end. His presence was unnerving, an unnatural stillness that made the hairs on their necks rise. They retreated, trying to remain calm, but the feeling of being watched persisted until they left the inn the following morning. The hotel staff later confirmed that the property had experienced repeated trespassing incidents, often at night, with local authorities unable to trace the culprits. The 13th story focuses on a solo traveler in Las Vegas seeking thrill and escape. She booked a room in a low-rated hotel close to the Strip, drawn by price rather than reputation. Neon lights promised excitement, but inside, the lobby smelled of smoke and damp carpet. The bed sheets were faintly stained, and the odor of mildew was pervasive. Her phone line dialed sporadically on its own, producing clicks and indistinct murmurs. Around midnight, movement in the hallways escalated to muffled voices and loud bangs. Peering from the window, she noticed a man on the balcony of an adjacent room staring directly at her. Panic set in, compounded by the dwindling battery of her phone. Only by leaving the building and entering the crowded streets did she find temporary relief. Later research revealed a history of stalking and harassment at the hotel, confirming the reality of her fears. The 14th story is set in Colorado, where a family rented a lodge for a weekend escape. They anticipated crisp air and scenic views, but the lodge presented subtle signs of prior mischief. Rusted door locks, rattling windows, and a faint, unpleasant odor suggested negligence or worse. At night, footsteps echoed, and whispering voices near the doors stirred the mother from sleep. Dismissing it initially, she froze when the doorknob began to turn. A shadowy figure slipped through a slightly open window, entering the room silently. The father restrained the intruder while ensuring the child's safety. Police confirmed that the lodge had been used as a hideout by a local gang, and prior reports of danger had gone unaddressed. Finally, the 15th story takes us to a Midwestern city where a young couple booked a hotel suite for an anniversary. Online reviews were positive, yet subtle anomalies suggested danger. A faint mildew odor, flickering lights, and minor damage to the room. Around 1 a.m., a knock and whispering voices prompted fear. Attempts to call the front desk revealed a disconnected line. A shadow appeared at the door, probing the chain lock repeatedly. The psychological torment persisted through the night, culminating in an early morning departure, a ruined anniversary, and a lasting distrust of hotels. Each of these 15 stories shares common elements. Ordinary settings transformed into arenas of fear. Subtle warnings escalating into direct threats, and survivors who carry the psychological scars long after the incidents. These narratives rely on first-person perspectives, sensory-rich descriptions, and deliberate pacing to cultivate suspense. They underscore the fragility of safety and the enduring power of fear, grounded in reality rather than fantasy. Hotels, typically perceived as safe havens, become vessels for terror, demonstrating that danger often hides in the most familiar places. The 16th story transports us to a remote motel in New Mexico. A solo traveler, eager to explore the vast desert landscape, arrived late at night, exhausted from a long drive. The motel appeared innocuous under the dim glow of a flickering neon sign, yet a creeping unease settled as he approached the lobby. The front desk clerk, pale and distracted, handed him a key without a word of caution. On his way to the room, he noticed the hallways were unusually silent, the walls adorned with faded photographs that seemed to watch his every move. Inside the room, subtle signs hinted at previous occupancy. A faint odor lingered, mixing mildew with something metallic, and the bed appeared hastily made, as if someone had been there moments before. The traveler shrugged off the unease. intending only to sleep before continuing his journey. But as he settled onto the bed, soft scratching noises began near the closet. The sound grew more pronounced, accompanied by the faint creak of floorboards outside the door. His curiosity overpowered fear, and he approached the closet, opening the door cautiously. The closet was empty, but a sudden slam of the window rattled the entire room. Heart racing, he turned toward the door and noticed a shadow move just beyond the chain lock. Panic surged, and he bolted from the room, locking himself in the car. From a distance, he watched figures move through the motel, checking doors and windows with deliberate precision. It wasn't until morning, when other guests arrived and normal activity resumed, that he dared to retrieve his belongings. Weeks later, he learned that the motel had been linked to a series of petty crimes, all occurring in the dead of night, targeting travelers who arrived alone. The 17th story unfolds in a bustling urban hotel in New York City. A young businesswoman checked in late after a long day of meetings. The lobby was elegant, filled with modern art and soft ambient music. Yet she immediately sensed a subtle unease as the elevator doors closed. On reaching her floor, she noticed the hallway lights flickered inconsistently, casting distorted shadows that seemed to elongate and retreat unnaturally. Entering her room, she discovered the window locks were loose and the safe had been tampered with, though nothing appeared missing. As night fell, the sounds of the city faded, leaving an eerie silence punctuated by faint knocking at her door. When she ignored it, the knocking grew insistent, accompanied by muffled footsteps outside. She called the front desk, only to be informed that no staff had been near her floor. Fear escalated when she noticed a shadow moving behind the curtains, shifting in ways inconsistent with the natural sway of the night breeze. She barricaded the door with furniture, her pulse racing. Hours later, security discovered an intruder in a neighboring room, confirming her suspicion. She had been under surveillance, targeted by someone observing hotel patterns and exploiting vulnerabilities. The 18th story is set in a quiet mountain town in Vermont. A family renting a cabin for a weekend getaway discovered subtle anomalies from the start. Doors that didn't latch properly, windows that rattled in the wind, and a faint smell of decay. At night, the father awoke to the sound of whispering voices near his bedroom door. Initially dismissing it as the wind or an animal, his concern grew as the whispering formed coherent words, taunting the family. They attempted to leave, but the roads were blocked by fallen trees, forcing them to spend the night trapped with an unknown threat. A shadowy figure appeared briefly outside the window, moving with deliberate caution. The family huddled together, waiting for dawn, unsure if the intruder had entered or remained outside. Morning brought relief, but the incident left lingering paranoia. Even years later, they recounted the fear of isolation and vulnerability, noting that the idyllic setting had masked a night of terror. This story illustrates the intersection of environmental vulnerability and human threat, showing that even scenic, peaceful locations can harbor danger when vigilance lapses. The 19th story originates from a budget motel near the interstate in Texas. A group of friends traveling cross-country decided to stay overnight due to exhaustion. The motel was advertised as convenient and affordable. Yet the building's state suggested long-term neglect. Peeling paint, broken locks, and flickering hallway lights. Inside the room, they discovered a mix of disturbing elements. Bloodstains faintly cleaned over, cigarette burns on the bedding, and insects moving freely across surfaces. One of the friends joked about horror movies, attempting to lighten the mood, but the tension was palpable. Around midnight, a van pulled into the parking lot, and men exited, moving with intent towards a neighboring room. A woman screamed for help, and the friends realized the danger was immediate. With a young child in their group, the stakes became critical. Police presence outside prevented abduction, but the psychological impact lingered. The friends recounted the story repeatedly, emphasizing how quickly an ordinary night could transform into chaos, and how vigilance and quick thinking saved lives. The 20th story is set in a small town inn in Michigan. A solo traveler, accustomed to routine hotel stays, booked a low-rated property due to availability constraints. The lobby was quiet and dimly lit, and the front desk clerk provided minimal interaction. Upon entering the room, the traveler noticed subtle signs of intrusion. Drawers left slightly open, a faint scent of unknown origin, and an uneven bed. Despite these warning signs, exhaustion prompted her to attempt sleep. In the middle of the night, she awoke to a knock at the door, accompanied by a whispered voice attempting to imitate housekeeping. Fearing a break-in, she ignored the knocking, but the sound persisted, escalating to forceful attempts at entry. She barricaded the door, calling local authorities who arrived promptly, deterring the intruder. Investigations later revealed the inn had been a hotspot for petty crime and voyeuristic activity, targeting solo travelers. This story underscores the vulnerability of those traveling alone and how ordinary accommodations can conceal extraordinary danger. The 21st story involves a family visiting a rural inn in Oregon. Arriving late, they found the property welcoming by day, but the nighttime atmosphere brought a different energy. Hallways echoed with indistinct sounds. Doors creaked, and the faint smell of mildew lingered. The children slept nearby, unaware, while the parents remained hyper-aware of every movement. Around 2 a.m., a door slammed in an empty corridor, followed by the sound of footsteps approaching their room. The father investigated cautiously, only to find a figure retreating into the shadows. The family remained alert until morning, their sense of safety shattered. Learning later that the inn had a history of nocturnal intrusions and unreported disturbances, the lingering fear persisted long after their stay, altering how they approached travel accommodations in the future. The 22nd story recounts a solo traveler staying in a historic hotel in Boston. The building, renowned for its age and architecture, appeared charming at first glance. Yet upon entering, the traveler noticed faint odors, creaking floorboards, and hallway lights that flickered inconsistently. As the night progressed, knocks sounded on her door, accompanied by indistinct whispers. Security patrols were inconsistent, leaving her to rely on instinct and barricades for protection. The experience emphasized the vulnerability inherent in historic properties, where structural integrity and security are often compromised. These stories share common themes. Ordinary hotels and motels become sites of terror. Subtle warning signs escalate into clear threats, and survivors carry long-term psychological scars. Each tale utilizes first-person perspectives, sensory-rich descriptions, and deliberate pacing to create suspense. They highlight the fragility of safety in spaces perceived as mundane and safe, transforming familiar locations into arenas of fear. Through contrast framing, the narrative emphasizes the shift from normalcy to danger, intensifying emotional engagement. The 23rd story takes place in a rural motel in Washington state. A traveling writer seeking inspiration for his next novel booked a room advertised as quiet and private. The motel appeared serene at sunset, but as darkness fell, the environment shifted. A faint scratching noise echoed through the walls, and doors creaked in empty corridors. The writer initially dismissed it as age-related building sounds, but the noises persisted, growing more deliberate, almost rhythmic. Shadows moved in peripheral vision, vanishing when directly observed. Around midnight, he noticed a figure outside his window, obscured by darkness, yet clearly observing. Panicked, he attempted to retreat into the room, only to discover the door slightly ajar. Despite locking it, the figure had tested the entry while he was distracted, leaving the writer shaken and hyper-aware. He spent the rest of the night vigilantly monitoring every movement, unable to sleep. By morning, the figure was gone, leaving him questioning reality and sanity. Later, he learned from locals that the motel had been the site of repeated nighttime intrusions, often targeting solo travelers. The experience left a lasting impression on him, influencing both his writing and his personal travel habits. The 24th story originates from a mid-sized hotel in Atlanta, Georgia. A family of 4 arrived after a long road trip, expecting a simple overnight stay. The lobby appeared ordinary, yet subtle anomalies were present: flickering lights, a faint odor of mildew, and a receptionist who avoided eye contact. Their room, adjacent to the lobby, seemed harmless until the late hours. Around 1:30 a.m., they heard banging noises on the neighboring door, followed by muffled screams. Initially assuming a guest dispute, the father attempted to investigate, but was stopped by the receptionist, who muttered, "It happens sometimes. Best not to interfere." The sounds escalated, and the family realized the danger was not minor. A woman in the neighboring room was being threatened by intruders, and though police arrived quickly due to a vigilant passerby outside, the psychological trauma for the family lingered. This incident highlighted a chilling reality. Even hotels with families present can harbor violence that goes unnoticed until too late. The 25th story shifts to a coastal resort in California. A couple stayed for a weekend getaway, anticipating relaxation and scenic beauty. The resort, well reviewed online, appeared perfect in daylight. However, by nightfall, subtle disturbances began. Creaking floorboards, whispers through the hallways, and doors that seemed to lock and unlock by themselves. Attempts to contact the front desk were met with delayed or confusing responses. Around 2 a.m., they heard soft tapping on the window, followed by an indistinct male voice calling out. Fear escalated as the tapping became more insistent, and shadows were seen moving just beyond the curtains. The couple barricaded the door, realizing that their previously secure environment had been compromised. Police involvement later revealed a series of similar incidents at the resort, often involving stalking or voyeuristic activity targeting guests. The couple left immediately. The romantic getaway transformed into a night of terror and unease. The 26th story recounts a solo traveler in a Midwest inn. Exhausted from a long journey, he checked into a seemingly ordinary room late at night. Subtle signs of intrusion appeared almost immediately. Drawers slightly ajar, a faint odor of unknown origin, and an uneven bed. Around midnight, knocks on the door, accompanied by whispered voices, triggered intense fear. Attempts to reach hotel staff proved futile due to disconnected phone lines. Using furniture to barricade the door, he waited until local authorities arrived, ensuring his safety. The psychological impact of the night persisted, making him hyper-vigilant during all future travels. The 27th story involves a family visiting a small town inn in Oregon. Arriving late in the evening, the parents were immediately aware of subtle anomalies. Hallways that echoed strangely, doors creaking as if moved by unseen hands, and a faint smell of mildew lingering in the air. Around 2 a.m., a door slammed in the corridor, and footsteps approached their room. The father cautiously investigated, catching a glimpse of a shadow retreating into darkness. Morning brought relief. Yet, the family remained haunted by the sensation of being watched and by the knowledge that the inn had a history of nocturnal intrusions. The 28th story focuses on a solo traveler at a historic hotel in Boston. The building's charm masked subtle signs of decay and danger. Flickering lights, creaking floors, and faint odors that lingered despite cleaning. As the night progressed, knocks and whispers from the hallway intensified, escalating into psychological terror. The traveler relied on barricades and personal vigilance, while hotel security was inconsistent. The experience highlighted how even prestigious historic hotels can conceal threats, turning ordinary accommodations into sites of fear. The 29th story recounts a family staying at a rural lodge in Vermont. The idyllic location, surrounded by mountains and forests, offered tranquility by day. Yet at night, footsteps echoed in the hallways. Shadows moved unpredictably, and doors appeared to open and close on their own. The family spent hours awake, hyper-aware, until dawn finally brought relief. Subsequent investigation revealed the lodge had a history of trespassing and unexplained disturbances, proving that even peaceful, scenic accommodations can harbor danger. The 30th and final story concludes our journey with a contemporary account from a traveler staying in a low-rated Las Vegas hotel. Neon lights lured gay guests with the promise of excitement. Yet inside, subtle signs of neglect were immediately apparent. Cigarette burns on bedding, flickering hallway lights, and an uneasy silence in the corridors. Around midnight, unexplained phone calls, footsteps outside the door, and shadows in peripheral vision created an escalating sense of terror. The traveler left the hotel in haste, shaken and wary of even the most ordinary-looking accommodations. These 30 stories collectively illustrate a chilling truth. Hotels, motels, and inns, spaces designed for comfort and temporary respite, can conceal profound danger. The terror emerges not from supernatural forces, but from reality itself, human malice, neglect, and unforeseen circumstances. Through first-person narratives, sensory-rich descriptions, and deliberate pacing, each story immerses the listener, building suspense that is both immediate and lingering. Contrast framing between normalcy and threat heightens tension, while reflective conclusions emphasize psychological impact, ensuring the fear persists long after the narrative ends. So, as you settle into your own room tonight, remember the lessons of these tales. Check your locks, observe your surroundings, and trust your instincts. Safety is often an illusion, and the ordinary can quickly become extraordinary in the most terrifying way imaginable. Sleep cautiously, for the shadows you ignore may already be watching.